there were things that we eliminated and things that we expanded on.
The first thing I wanted to ask you was, even just from what I saw last night, outside of Stephanie, most people involved with the film didn't really know who Joseph Bologna was before you got the project. Why do you think his story hadn't really been explored until now?
I think that, unfortunately, Joseph Bologna's life, the life of the Chevalier, was, erased. I think there's kind of no polite way to say that. Napoleon came into power post-revolution in France and ordered the suppression of Joseph's life, his music, and as a result, very, very little has been written about Joseph. Very little of Chevalier's music remains. I think probably, I'm guesstimating, but somewhere in the region of only a third of his musical output is still available to us, barring somebody discovering a cache of compositions somewhere in a basement of a remote French abbey somewhere, and so he's just one of those figures in history that has been left on the wayside, left by the wayside, to languish in obscurity until relatively recently.
And this film is beautiful. Even the way it's filmed, I especially loved. For example, maybe when he's writing his opera, just the way the camera moves, the way you do everything is gorgeous. Was it a conscious effort to shoot this film in a way that felt very modern?
Yeah, absolutely. Once, so as you quite rightly said, I didn't know anything about Chevalier until I got the script. And my mind was blown. I was like, how did I not know about someone whose life was so expansive? He was so accomplished. He was such he was a virtuosic violinist, composer of concertos, opera, champion marksman, champion equestrian, champion fencer. John Adams, the American president, described him as the most accomplished man in all of Europe, and I knew nothing about him. And once I started kind of trying to find, gather information and gather, stories about him, and the time period in which he lived, it became really apparent that, if this movie wasn't like set in a specific period, and if the characters weren't, as a result of that period, forced to wear wigs and costumes, so much of what transpired during the course of Joseph's life could have been happening right now. There was a kind of cultural relevance to it, a contemporary, a very recognizable contemporary quality to so much of and so many of the events of his life. And that then immediately kind of made me think, well, the tonal visual grammar of this piece is that one foot has to be planted in honoring the period in which Joseph lived, and the other has to kind of speak to that sense of immediacy and that sense of that contemporary vibe. And so that was kind of like our operating MO in terms of trying to develop and evolve and execute the visual grammar of the film.
And as modern as it looks, where do you make the choice to be super historically accurate? And are you looking at sets or costumes or the musical pieces you choose? Like, where do you choose to be as accurate as you can, and where do you kind of do your own interpretation?
Yeah, there's this great quote from the playwright Tom Stoppard, right? Facts are facts, and truth is something else entirely, and is a product of the imagination. And I think that we didn't set out to make a cradle to grave biopic. We set out to make a movie that was an imagining of this historical figure, but one where we used our own kind of connection to the material to get at what we experienced to be the truthful essence of this person's life, even where factual aspects of it were either not known to us or rearranged and redeployed to better tell the story of Joseph's life and this portion of his life in as cinematic and as operatic a way as possible. His life was defined by huge passions, huge, excellence, striving, grand love affairs, betrayal, loss, all the staples of revenge, all the staples of opera. And it felt like that's also like what a meta way to kind of approach this movie visually is like, this guy's a composer of opera who happened to live an operatic life that spoke to the way in which we selected what aspects of his story to prioritize and the way in which we executed that visually.
Speaking of what you wanted to prioritize, you and Stephanie said you went through something like 24 drafts, I think, on this. Were there threads that you as a director wanted to expand on when you first came aboard the project and read what she'd already done? Yeah,
I mean, there were areas that I wanted to expand on and areas that I wanted to eliminate. Joseph Bologna was born, was the progeny of a French plantation owner and his 16-year-old enslaved woman on his plantation. And so there's a portion of Joseph's life, probably up until he was about 10 years old, before he was taken to France by his father, that took place, unfolded in plantation in Guadeloupe. And, we toyed with the idea of doing that, including portions of that in his life, but in the movie, but ultimately decided to eliminate that because it felt like we had seen enough of that, and our movie wasn't really about that portion of his life. He carries that baggage with him, that inheritance, that cultural inheritance with him, and it informs his journey. But we didn't need to spend a lot of time on a plantation in Guadeloupe in order to tell that iteration of his life. So there were things that we eliminated and things that we expanded on.
Yeah.
It's just the constant kind of evolution of just winnowing and trying to get to the marrow of his story.
And I got to ask about Bob Marley, because you guys talked about that yesterday. Yeah. You were saying you put Bob Marley quotes on all of the call sheets and just kind of described what you were doing through the lens of Bob Marley's lyrics. Can you talk about just how his music informed your work, and maybe were there parallels that you saw between Bob Marley and Joseph Bologna?
Yeah, I think that, Bob Marley is, obviously part of the cultural tapestry of my place of origin. I was born in Jamaica, and, he is such a kind of a huge cultural figure. His impact has expanded beyond the confines of reggae music. I mean, he is a musical revolutionary, and he's both a revolutionary in terms of socio-political arena, but also just internally, spiritual evolution, spiritual revolution, right? Growth and change. And that was very much those two elements were so much a part of Joseph Bologna's life. He became a revolutionary, like in a literal sense, leading a 1,000-man battalion in the French Revolution against the monarchy. But he also underwent an internal and spiritual revolution from the opening of the movie to the end of the movie. And that was really important to me. And I saw, again, all of these kind of the Venn diagram of Bob Marley, my life, Joseph Bologna, Chevalier's life, all started to blend into one big DNA, helix strand that I tried to find a way to render visually. The very last performance in the movie, and Marie Antoinette, when she reads the flyer advertising the last concert in the movie, it's deliberately called Uprising, because that was the last album that Bob Marley recorded before he sloughed off this mortal coil. So the references and the kind of interweaving of that his spiritual energy was everywhere in the movie, in ways that maybe only I can discern, but it might not be apparent to the casual viewer. But they're there.
Oh, that's amazing. And then this is my last one for you. I'm a musician. I think musicians everywhere just really appreciate when it's clear that a film cares about being authentic to music in general. And obviously Kelvin went through so much work to learn the violin and turn in the performance he did. But what's the hardest thing as a director about putting together a musical performance sequence and making sure that it does feel authentic to the viewer?
I mean, the hardest thing is really, you quite rightly said it, it falls on Kelvin's shoulders, because he's the guy who's got to bow that violin in a way that is convincing, in a way that's really credible. And as we shared with you last night, there's no trickery. There's no stunt doubles. There's no cinematic magic. It's just long takes of Kelvin bowing that violin like the maestro that he worked really hard to become. And so the hardest thing really, it would be disingenuous of me to talk about the hardest thing for me when really it's the actor who had to undergo the strictest kind of work mandate. But yeah, just trying to honor that, just trying to keep front and center through all of this stuff that we've talked about. Joseph Bologna was a real person. He was a real person. And we all just at the end of the day wanted to be respectful of that and honor the life of this real musical revolutionary.
That's amazing. That's all I have for you today. But this film is so beautiful. It's congratulations, you guys.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much.